And now it is my pleasure to introduce our Convocation speaker. Thomas Woods is a popular, award-winning, and very busy speaker, and I wanted him to know how much we appreciate his taking the time to come to Benedictine College. He's the New York Times best-selling author of 11 books, the creator of the online Liberty Classroom, and is a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Harvard and a master's and PhD from Columbia University. As I always say, if you can't get into Benedictine, those are two pretty good schools to go to. He has appeared on CNBC, MSNBC, Fox News Channel, Fox Business Network, C-SPAN, and Bloomberg Television, among other outlets, and has been a guest on hundreds of radio programs, including National Public Radio, The Dennis Miller Show, The Michael Reagan Show, The Dennis Prager Show, and The Michael Medved Show. Dr. Woods is currently a contributing editor of the American Conservative magazine, a contributor to 6 encyclopedias. Woods is co-editor of Exploring American History from Colonial Times to 1877, an 11-volume encyclopedia. His writing has appeared in dozens of popular and scholarly periodicals, including the American Historical Review, Christian Science Monitor, Catholic Historical Review, Modern Age, and Religion and Liberty. And his books have been translated into many languages, including Italian, Spanish, Polish, French, German, Czech, Portuguese, Croatian, Slovak, Russian, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. In 2006, he won the prestigious Templeton Enterprise Award, given by the Intercollegiate Studies Institute and the Templeton Foundation for his book, The Church and the Market. He's also been awarded 2 Humane Studies Fellowships and the Claude Lambie Fellowship from the Institute of Humane Studies at George Mason University. And he is a fellow Kansan, living in Topeka with his wife and 4 daughters. So let's please welcome Dr. Thomas Woods.
Thank you. Well, Archbishop Naumann, Reverend clergy, President Minnis, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. This is my first time ever in Atchison, and it's a real pleasure, given all the universities where I speak, to speak at a college that isn't an insane asylum with a football team. So it's nice to, once in a while, to be at an institution where I actually respect the people who are running it. You actually have a good president. I'm saying that not just because he's sitting right behind me. Well, I've got only 20 minutes with you, so 20 minutes from now you can take those things off your head, but not one moment before. I have 3 things I'd like to say today, and they are as follows. Well, I'm going to outline them, and then I'm going to expand on them. First is I want to say a little something about the Catholic Church's contribution to Western civilization, which we all belong to. And note that they are so extraordinary that it is astonishing to me that we should feel in any way on the defensive. Secondly, I want to say a little something about some of the critics we face, and again, say how amazed I am that we should feel in any way on the defensive. And thirdly, some advice. If we are to be successful, we cannot allow the spirit of the world, the spirit that animates these critics, to invade our conduct, our piety, or our minds. Now, it's worth noting that when Pope John Paul II wrote his apostolic constitution, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, the first few words of that document, which of course give it its name, mean from the heart of the church. That's pretty significant. That's a significant choice of words, from the heart of the church. What's from the heart of the church? The university itself. The university itself is a gift of the high Middle Ages to Western civilization and to the world at large. There was no institution like this prior to that time. Oh, there was the academy, there was the Lyceum in the ancient world, but they were not comparable to modern universities with their programs of study, their degrees, their distinction between graduate and undergraduate study. This all came to us through the church and through the fostering and the care of the church and the papacy in particular. Now, nobody knows this. We know it. Very few people know it. When I used to be a college professor, my students, to the extent that they knew anything, their view was that the church thrives on ignorance. She wants to keep all you people stupid, so you'll keep putting money in the collection plate. That was the level of sophistication I dealt with on a daily basis. I'm out of academia now. If I were here at Benedictine, that'd be another matter, but after a while, you can only take so much of this. That's what they learned, though. That's what they were taught. I've sometimes thought that the most depressing job in the world must be to be a medieval historian. Because no matter how much work you do, no matter how many books and articles you write, no matter how many television interviews you do, you go home at night, you're eating your TV dinner, and on TV somebody is making fun of the Middle Ages once again, and you feel like, what's it all for, right? I've just devoted my life to trying to correct these misconceptions, and people still have them. But the prejudice under which we have labored for many years is as follows, that everything good in Western civilization came to us from the Enlightenment, from the skeptics, from the atheists, because they had free minds. They were able to explore anywhere their thoughts would take them. And they gave us all these wonderful advances that we associate with Western civilization. Well, this nonsensical view, utterly indefensible view, prevailed for about 200 years, until finally, in the 20th century, historians started to do their jobs. And they looked back at the evidence and said, now wait just a minute. Is it really true that all the contributions came from the Enlightenment? Is it really true that the Catholic Church, the most influential institution in Western civilization, was just an obstacle in the path of these things? That all these good things developed in spite of the strongest institution that existed at that time? Is that plausible? And they found that, well, you know what? Turns out, for example, when we look at the study of economics, it used to be thought that economics is a study that emerged out of Adam Smith's brain. He had a giant brain, and all of economic thought was in there, and then one day it just came out. And then there were other people, but really it was just this guy had just a great big brain. Well, now there is no historian of economic thought who believes that anymore. In the mid-20th century, we got the posthumous History of Economic Analysis by the great economist Joseph Schumpeter. And he said, you know who the real founders of modern scientific economics are? It's not Adam Smith and his giant brain. It's the late scholastic philosophers and theologians of the University of Salamanca. Well, how about that? How about that? For hundreds of years, we didn't know this because nobody bothered to look. Because everybody already knew the answer. Everything came out of the 18th century. Why should I bother looking? So when I wrote a book called How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, I was taking all this modern scholarship and trying to bring it to a popular audience. Because it turns out that in one discipline after another, we now have to acknowledge that, well, gee, after all, the church wasn't just burning everybody at the stake or whatever it is people think, right? As it turns out, they were doing some important things that make the West what it is today. Well, how about that? Now, of course, there are many, I won't go into them all, because then why would you buy the book, right? I can't go into them all now. But the area where people were least likely to believe you is when you get to the sciences, right? Because everybody thinks they know, they all know, right, the history of the sciences, and the church hates knowledge, right? And the church is trying to shut down scientific inquiry, and we all know this story, right? We all know about Galileo, and everybody thinks they know all this sort of stuff. So I made that the longest chapter, because I knew there I had my work cut out for me. But it is safe to say that there is no professional historian of science today who still believes what almost everybody believed just a century ago. When Professor White of Cornell, Andrew Dixon White, wrote his 2-volume history of the alleged warfare between religion and science in the West. Nobody believes that anymore. Now, okay, the average person still believes it, but the scholars, they don't believe this. And the evidence for not believing it is simply overwhelming. So in other words, my point is that the church has done some extraordinary and impressive things in building up Western civilization. Now, in the 2nd century, when St. Justin Martyr was debating with the pagan philosophers around him, he was debating with people who also were very impressive. He was debating with people who were worthy adversaries. These were people who could boast of great civilizations, outstanding achievements in the arts and sciences, and an exalted view of how a truly human life could and ought to be lived. Many of these philosophers doubtless were Platonists, and as my friend Ed Fazer puts it, when we look to Plato, what do we see? The following propositions: that the material world points beyond itself to an eternal source, that things have immutable forms or essences, that the foundation of morality is to be found in this source and in these essences, that human beings have immaterial souls, that all of this is knowable through reason, and that knowing it is the highest end of philosophy and science. Those are worthy adversaries. But think about our critics today, how we have fallen. Can our critics today boast an exalted view of what human life can be? Can our critics today boast great achievements in art and architecture? You can hardly even ask the question with a straight face. Our culture is consumed today by a fetish for moral and aesthetic ugliness. I have a dear friend who got his master's in architecture at the University of Virginia. And the students were asked one day, "Tell us, each one of you, why are you studying architecture?" And my friend replied, "Because I want to design beautiful buildings." The other students laughed at him. In the 20th century, there was a poll done. What was the most influential work of modern art? Answer: Duchamp's The Fountain. You know what The Fountain is? It's a man's urinal with the artist's signature on it. That was the most influential work of modern art in the 20th century. We have case after case of art exhibits in which the janitor accidentally throws the exhibit in the garbage because he didn't know it was art. How can we possibly be losing to these people? Or let's consider, what is the ideal that's held out to us for how we ought to live? In the ancient world, we sometimes heard the maxim, live according to nature. Now, what the Stoics meant by that was pursuing virtue as the best way to conform oneself to the inscrutable divine plan. For the Aristotelian, living according to nature meant discovering the unique characteristic feature of human beings, which is our rational nature, and living our lives by exercising that reason in our moral conduct and in our intellectual pursuits. Today, live according to nature means do whatever comes naturally. Virtue doesn't come naturally, said Aristotle, but that's the advice being given. Do whatever comes naturally. Man is a beast and ought to be quite content in his beastly state. The cultivation of virtue is old-fashioned and passé. Just do what feels good and have the manners of a savage and dress like a slob. There's your advice. We also have a great intellectual tradition in the Catholic Church, and this is equally lost on our culture today. Today, people think Richard Dawkins is a great intellectual. Again, how we have fallen. At least we used to have opponents who were worthy. Richard Dawkins, of course, who wrote the book The God Delusion, is so ignorant of the subject he writes about that he actually says that St. Thomas Aquinas, after running us through his 5 ways of demonstrating God's existence, never tells us why we should believe that this God he claims to have proven must be one, must be omniscient, must be omnipotent. He never says that his God has to have the attributes of traditional Western theism. Oh yeah, he never says that, Richard Dawkins. Never, never. I guess he only spent hundreds of pages on that subject in the Summa Contra Gentiles. So in other words, this Richard Dawkins commits an error of appalling magnitude, an error that if we had an educated public would make him laughed out of the public square as an incorrigible fool. But he's held up as the great example of intellectual life. And nobody even knows who Aquinas is in the general public. But there's our intellectual class for you. They may as well not even know who Aquinas is if they're not going to bother to read him. So here is the ledger. While in the past we faced critics whose nobility was obvious and which we freely acknowledged, today our critics know zero about the Catholic intellectual tradition. They have ugliness to show for themselves and conceive of man as nothing but a bundle of appetites and passions. How can we be losing to this? It amazes me. But although we have many just grounds for complaint, we're not treated fairly in the media, we're not treated fairly in the movies, we also need to examine ourselves. Woe is me will take us only so far. How well have we immersed ourselves in the Church's intellectual tradition? How devoted are we to our studies? To what extent have we brought this to people? Have we made it comprehensible to them? Have we used the media that's available to us now for free to spread these compelling ideas? How much have we studied the Church's contributions to Western civilization so we can answer the critics? Or, to hit a point that hits closer to home for me, how can we expect the average person to know anything about the Church's beautiful and extraordinary musical patrimony when in our own parishes we prefer emasculating pap from the 1970s? My copy of Vatican II's documents says that Gregorian chant shall be given pride of place in the liturgy and that we ought not to neglect sacred polyphony as well. This is all gone through our own choosing. Our great legacy, it's all gone. If we think we are going to save young people from this culture by mimicking MTV with rock music, milquetoast preaching, and a casual familiarity in the presence of the sacred, we are deluded. And we should not be surprised when the Western Church is hemorrhaging young people. Mass should be a lesson in piety, wonder, respect, order, and even manners. It should be the sign of contradiction, because in our culture today, there is nothing so ancient or sacred that it can't be redefined or trampled on. And yet, what does our loud chit-chat after Mass in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament say about our faith? What does it tell the world about how serious we are? What message are we sending the world about our seriousness when we dress for Mass as if we're going to dig ditches or spend the day at the beach? We have laymen thoughtlessly shuffling around the holy sanctuary as if it's a 7-Eleven. There is in the current world, in our Western culture, there is no piety, there is no wonder, there is no sense of awe. That's what we need to capture in our own lives, in our own worship, as an example, as a pedagogical device to the world. When we are in the presence of the sacred, how do we conduct ourselves? We live in a culture that is deeply hostile to tradition. Again, there is no institution that's too traditional for them to touch. Everything is to be remade. Everything is to be destroyed and rebuilt. Everything. That's how a revolutionary behaves and thinks. And that's the culture we live in. But in this culture hostile to tradition, we should embrace tradition. Tradition, Chesterton memorably said, is the democracy of the dead. And it was this lesson that Pope Benedict XVI wanted to teach us. That if something is sacred and great for us in the past, it is sacred and great for us today. The Catholic Church is not a George Orwell novel that will teach you that what you loved 10 minutes ago is now strictly forbidden. He says this is not the way the Catholic Church operates. And so he urged respect. He urged that the traditional liturgy of the Church be given due honor for its venerable and ancient usage. And he said that young people who are so at risk in this type of culture have discovered, I'm quoting him, this liturgical form, felt its attraction, and found in it a form of encounter with the mystery of the most holy Eucharist particularly suited to them. What a wonderful addition to Benedictine this would be. A final word to the students here. Enrolling at Benedictine College may be the boldest thing you have ever done. And I am deeply envious of the opportunity you have. Your president mentioned that I went to a couple of fancy colleges, but let me tell you something. What that meant was that if I wanted to learn real truths, if I wanted to study the real questions that really matter, I had to do it on my own. I had to be an autodidact. Every educated person is an autodidact to one degree or another. But you have the opportunity to learn truths that will elude some people their whole lives, and you can learn them under the auspices of some fantastic faculty who are deeply devoted to the whole person that is you. You aren't a run-of-the-mill student who gullibly accepts whatever trendy opinion foists upon him. And so a tremendous responsibility sits on your shoulders. The point of your education here at Benedictine is not to fill your head with sterile knowledge that can make you proud of yourselves, but indeed learn everything you can, represent the church well in your profession, but also as an ambassador of the church herself. Let the beauty of the Catholic faith shine forth in your work, in your speech, and in your love. And then with St. Paul, you will be able to say that you have fought the good fight and finished the race. Good luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. It's very enlightening. I always thought Richard Dawkins was the star of Family Feud, but now I know different. In recognition of this year's opening convocation, we have a token of our deep appreciation. Let's thank Dr. Woods once more.